canal del ecosistema de logística y comercio exterior presenta
Mujer y Comercio Internacional con la licenciada Aura Moreno y Jane Korinek.
Welcome to the Logistics and Foreign Trade Ecosystem channel. This space was created to bring forward the key conversations shaping international trade in our region with a critical forward-looking perspective. Today, we open with a topic that has long been overlooked, yet it is fundamental to the future of trade. The role of women in international commerce, the gaps that persist, and the opportunities to close them. To guide us through this conversation, we are honored to welcome Jane Korinek, Senior Economist and Policy Analyst at the OECD, who led the study Trade and Gender in Latin America. Jane, welcome. And
thank you
for
my
being
pleasure.
with us.
My pleasure.
Perfect. So, this report fills a gap that, as you've noted, has been largely overlooked in our region. And I want you to tell us how does it show that gender gaps in trade remain remarkably static, as while women in Latin America are still 40% less likely to hold export-oriented jobs than men, we see outliers like Peru, which is closer to parity, and Colombia, which leads the region in women in executive positions. So, beyond the data, what specific policy frameworks or practices did you identify in these two countries that could serve as a blueprint for the rest to replicate?
So you raise a number of interesting points. So this is really kind of a new area of research. In the international community, we started talking about trade and gender only in 2017. So that's less than 10 years. And that was in the World Trade Organization, in the sidelines of a major ministerial conference in Buenos Aires, where about 170 or 180 countries signed on to a declaration on women in trade. That was really the starting point for looking into issues of women in trade, of women's engagement in trade, and how trade impacts men and women differently. And we started working in this area in OECD in 2020. And the first real policy report or publication came out in 2020 by the World Bank and the World Trade Organization. So it's really, we're really starting to get into this research. And you point to a very important aspect of this, and that is women in leadership. And that is something particularly important here in Mexico. As you mentioned, Colombia is doing a bit better in this area. There are more women in senior leadership. There are more women in management positions. And why is that important? That is important for the bottom line and for economic progress, because there are many studies, there is much research that points to the fact that diverse teams are more efficient and bring better governance to businesses. So in Mexico, the number is 18%. Only 18% of board positions, so that's the very top senior management in companies, 18% of board positions are held by women. That's a very low number, even within the Latin America region. And if you compare with North America, the number is about 33%. But even there, we are far from parity. Women are 50% of the population. They occupy 18% of the most senior roles in corporations here in Mexico. And you know what that means? It means that if countries are not taking advantage of half of their population's potential, that is a huge gap in the economic growth that they are not taking advantage of. So really, the stakes are high.
The stakes are high. And you mentioned the 80%. Also, there's a paradox at the heart of your findings that I'd love you to unpack for us. So the evidence consistently shows women repay loans at higher rates than men.
That's right.
Yet women-led firms are still percentage points less likely to receive external funding, and face as much as 50% more rejections when applying for trade finance. So in your view, where does the real blockage sit here?
So that's a really good question, and the answer is quite complex. So first of all, women generally have smaller businesses, and when they ask for loans or ask for credit, they ask for smaller amounts, and they actually receive even smaller amounts than what they ask for. So, and there are a number of reasons for this. When we look at the requirements for getting a loan or getting credit within a traditional banking or financial institution, they will be asking for collateral in terms of, a house or property or a credit history, and many women don't have those. So they will not be able to get a loan, anything other than a micro loan in a traditional banking organization. There are some kind of new fintech organizations and aspects that are starting to look at this question differently. So I'll give you an example. I met the day before yesterday with some women entrepreneurs here in Mexico. One of them has a small business. She sells within the country. She has one or two clients outside of the country, and she now has a larger client. In order to make, so she has an order from a client outside Mexico. She needs to produce for that order, ship. It takes a while for the shipping to take place. And once the order is received, she will generally be paid 90 days later. So that, for that kind of cash flow, a small business owner or a micro enterprise does not have. So really what we need is some kind of a little bit of a change in mindset, if possible, for trade finance or for kind of medium-sized loans. Another issue is that women-led businesses tend to be smaller, and they need a smaller loan in order to grow their business. This is something that banks are not very good at doing. They would prefer large clients and larger credit. Some banks have special programs that are destined for women-led businesses, but they don't seem to have been commercialized very successfully, or maybe not communicated the way they could be. But what we know now is that many women who are looking to export, for example, and need an immediate loan so that they can fill an order, are paying 20-25% interest. And that, of course, is very difficult to make any profit in that situation. But, the key is the one that you said. And I'm really, because women pay back their loans at a better rate than men. That there is clear evidence. And I'm a little surprised that some innovative bank is not taking advantage of that market, because women pay their loans more. There is a gap in the financing, and some efficient, fintech business needs to jump in there and fill that gap.
Sure, especially because I believe that the gap is a bit of a cycle, right? Like those women who leave smaller businesses do so because they dedicated a lot of their time for caregiving, which is a question I also have, but that's my final question. So, like turning right now to nearshoring, because you were talking about trade, I was really surprised to learn that only 10% of women-led firms in Latin America engage in international trade, compared to 14% of men-led firms, which is not that great of a difference, but it is a difference. And the gap is even wider in Mexico. So it struck me that what female entrepreneurs flagged something beyond the usual economic barriers, which is physical security, not just for crossing borders, but for getting their goods to marketplaces within the country. And Mexico is positioning itself as a nearshoring hub. How should trade policy respond to barriers like these that don't show up in a tariff schedule, but are just as real and often hit women hardest?
Absolutely. So security issues are all important. And I don't need to tell you that this is a big issue in Mexico. Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking here about security of goods to be traded and personal security. So in terms of goods to be traded, there are issues in rail transport, in road transport, trucks disappearing. For large firms, this is included in their operating costs. For small firms, this is much more difficult. There are stories of whole trucks disappearing, and imagine, you know, a two-bed new vehicle disappearing from your firm's fleet. That's a huge loss that you have to absorb. And small firms just can't do that. There are also stories in rail transport of cargo being tampered with. This is the kind of issue that can be an enormous setback and introduces a lot of uncertainty in the business climate. And of course, uncertainty is very bad for business. There's also the issue of personal security. A lot of firms are paying a lot of money to make sure that their employees are safe. Personal security is probably something that is more keenly felt by women than by men. And all of this just illustrates one thing. It's that trade is not divorced from the rest of the economy. The entire economy must work in the most efficient, the most certain environment in order to foster trade and bring the gains of trade to the people of the country.
Sure. And well, you talk about these large corporations, and I wonder, because the informal sector here is huge, especially for women. And maybe that's another reason why they don't incursionate into trade, because it's very dangerous, especially for them. And that intersects directly with gender violence. And I think that adds up to the percentage, but it also explains why men are also subjected to this kind of violences, right?
Yeah, so the informal sector for sure is a big issue in the entire region. I would say yes. In Mexico, it's not even the largest percentage. There are other countries in the region where the informal economy is even larger. But this is, of course, a big issue because, so I was talking to a woman exporter a few days ago who was talking about the fact that she exports a textile product. And one of her competitors exports a similar product for at a much lower price. And so she asked that competitor, how can you do this? Because I can't sell and make any money at that price. And it was clear that her competitor was not paying people minimum wage, not declaring workers, etc. And what that means is that it's very difficult for firms that want to be in the formal sector, and there are advantages to that for sure. They have to compete against those that are not in the formal sector. So that can have a snowball effect, and you can see that in a few countries in the region. Maybe not in Mexico so much, but once you allow that kind of activity, And there are more and more and larger firms that are in the informal sector. The incentive for firms is not to fully declare. This is also going to impact trade, especially, going forward, because in international trade, many trading partners, more and more, are insisting on traceability. They want to make sure that where and how goods are being produced. And so, firms have to explain, right? Have to have certifications that the product has been made in a certain way, it has been made sustainably, etc. And if you cannot prove that, and you can't, if there is a lot of informal activity in your supply chain, you may be closed off from certain markets. So really the incentive, trade should be an incentive for firms to formalize as well and take advantage of those opportunities.
Yes, totally. And that leads me to what would be our final question, but it has to do with the care economy as trade policy, and it has a lot to do with what you were talking about tax. So women perform at least twice the unpaid care work that men do, and your research essentially shows this functions as a hidden tariff on female productivity, and it also connects this directly to public investment. So the argument being that eroding tax basis means less revenue for childcare, for transportation, and this infrastructure would really allow and free women to trade and to perform and to maybe start businesses that are not so small or medium when they reach a certain age, when it is possible for them to incursionate in this business. And given all of that, do you think we've been making a category error, filing care systems under social policy when they should really be sitting at the trade facilitation table?
So, for sure, the lack of affordable and available childcare means that women cannot fully engage in labor markets and in trade and in entrepreneurship. So, this is something that we see in many countries in the world. This is one aspect that definitely holds women back. It holds them back, as you say, in terms of their productivity. But if half of the population is held back in their productivity, that means the entire country is also working at a lower level than it could be. So that's one aspect, is kind of the public policy around the availability and affordability of childcare. Another is really kind of a mindset that, as you mentioned, women in Mexico do about 2.5 times the unpaid work. So raising children, caring for elders, caring for those that need extra help, and taking responsibility for different chores around the house. If those were more evenly shared, there would be, first of all, a different mindset. And secondly, there would be a possibility for both genders to fully, access their work potential. So you mentioned the care economy, and the last time I was here in Mexico City, I was attending a United Nations regional conference on women last August. And the theme of that was the care economy. And it was opened by your president, President Sheinbaum, who said, this is the year of women. This is the year of women in Mexico and in the world. And I would say that's wonderful. And maybe we need to prioritize some of the aspects that are holding women back. All of this unpaid work, these issues of security. And of course, in our trade and gender review of Latin America, and soon a second report specifically on Mexico, we also talk about the trade policies that really could support women better, which are, for example, prioritizing sectors where women work and lead businesses in trade negotiations for market access, and also trade facilitation. So I would say let's make this the year of women in Mexico and in the world.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jane.
My pleasure.
I have an extra question that came to mind. I was reading like 5 minutes before you arrived, the report, and it struck me, you have a statement that says that women who perform trade or that choose trade as a profession are not necessarily the ones who are more qualified, and like in a professional setting, perhaps, like they don't go to college and study maybe an undergrad that allows them to then perform trade. And what you discussed about Sheinbaum has also been discussed like in the private sector, because all of the support that regards gender and women goes to, for example, the tech industry and STEM. And I wanted to ask you if that is related to trade. Why are women like who are getting access to these fundings or these scholarships in STEM? Should there be an opportunity for them to study something related to trade to get more information about it, to incursionate in this? Because right now what we see is that all of the support goes to STEM to support women who suffer or have suffered from gender gap in these sectors. But I don't hear that as often regarding trade.
So, people come into trade from all walks of life. So generally, the trade-related jobs are more highly skilled and more highly paid. So if women are not engaging as much in trade as men, they are losing out on some of those higher paid, higher skilled jobs. And similarly, women business leaders who are hesitant to go on to international markets or don't have enough access to finance in order to do so are losing out, right, on economies of scale, on diversification, on new markets. The whole women in STEM question that's a whole complicated issue into itself. And of course, we know that STEM-related jobs and STEM-related careers are, pretty highly remunerated. They are quite in demand, and there are few women. That there are many reasons for that. Starting at school, right, and fewer women choose those in academia. But all the way through the pipeline, right? You see women drop off and drop out of those careers because it's hard to say. Maybe it's a kind of a culture in the industry. Some people are trying to change that. Maybe it's not quite as inclusive as it could be. But there is a downside to that. And I'll just give you one example. It is that, so we all have facial recognition on our phones, right? Facial recognition works best for white men. It works less well for women, and for people of color, less well again. So the fact that that all of these models have been trained on white men who are, working in Silicon Valley means that the products that come out are really destined for them. Whereas we know that 80% of consumption decisions in the household are made by women. So we need more diversity in consumer goods, in trade, in tech, in all walks of life.
Sure. Yes, we do need the gender perspective, and in every sector we can get. Thank you so much, Jane, for this space.
My pleasure.
And that would be all for us.
My pleasure.
Entonces ya sabemos más.